Hey everyone, welcome to today's presentation. This is the fifth and final presentation in our Homegrown Entrepreneur Business Summit. And we are joined again by Leslie Cooperbrand, who was with us yesterday. And yesterday she talked about starting a dairy. And today she is going to talk about agritourism on their farm because they were just killing it. I think they kind of introduced agritourism to Illinois. So I will turn it over to Leslie now. Thanks, Leslie. Welcome.
Thank you. So, yes, I am going to give you an overview of how agritourism evolved on our goat dairy. When we started our operation, and the primary focus was organic tree fruits, berries, and goat dairy creamery, we had no intention of opening our doors to the public. Just that was not part of our original plan. But as you will see throughout my presentation, we dove headfirst into agritourism, and it turned out to be a really rewarding addition to our main enterprise. Okay, next slide. Thank you. Okay, so I am going to give you the evolution story. That is going to be a major focus of this presentation. I'm going to highlight the various examples of agritourism because there are many things that people can do, especially in a livestock setting. I distinguish agritourism from agri-entertainment. Agritourism for us was an opportunity for what we called stealth education. That is, like, people come to your farm, they're actually enjoying themselves, they're interacting with animals, they're interacting with a farm, a working farm. But they're also learning at the same time. And that is different from agri-entertainment, which is really you're creating an attraction. And I would consider petting zoos agri-entertainment. I would consider, like, mazes agri-entertainment, where the venue may be agriculture, but there's almost little connection to agriculture in the sense of this operation also feeds people. So that's my distinction. I'm not sure if it's universally accepted as a distinction, but when I'm talking about agritourism, I'm talking about opportunities for people to interact with agriculture in a way that ultimately makes them realize that, oh wow, this is a place where food is being raised, and yet, like, I can kind of see it firsthand. The other things that I'm going to talk about are just the nuts and bolts of what you get yourself into when you take on agritourism, the infrastructure needs, insurance, permits, staffing, etc. And then, again, as I mentioned yesterday in my presentation, the importance of really developing a sound business plan and running financial projections before you undertake a particular agritourism enterprise, so that you really have your eyes wide open going into it, understanding whether or not it's going to make you money. Next slide. Okay, so Prairie Fruits. We started as a goat dairy creamery. We were Illinois' first farmstead creamery, starting in the summer of 2005. We had purchased our farm from a cash grain agriculture farmer in 2003 and planted an orchard and pastures in 2004. We started through a variety of really fortuitous circumstances. We decided to put in a commercial kitchen on the farm in 2008. And as our agritourism grew, and as our ability to host people on the farm grew, we built a farm store that we called the Real Stand, and that was essentially 2011. And then last year, about a year ago, we sold the farm to new owners. They are in the food and hospitality space, and they are taking agritourism and farm to table to bigger and better heights than we could have ever had. We did not have the resources to do what they're doing, and they've basically created a restaurant on the farm now. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to kind of go through our own personal history. Okay, next slide. So what were we thinking? We often did things just because it seemed like a good idea at the time, and just, the circumstances presented themselves. So where our farm is located in Champaign, Urbana, it's a university town. It's a well-educated customer base. It's a very cosmopolitan international customer base. People had eaten goat cheese elsewhere before, so we had location. Our customers started, after a while, after we were in business for a few years, they just started driving up our driveway unannounced to check out what was going on. And we slowly started offering cheese for sale at our farm in a very small scale, like literally like people coming to our house to pick up cheese. So this I apologize for the dog barking. Hold on one second. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Got a new puppy. So we also, as we became a fixture at our local farmers market, we really came to value the other farms that were selling amazing food at the farmers market: vegetables, fruits, eggs, meats, you name it. And then, of course, having charismatic animals. Who does not love goats, especially baby goats? It just is a natural draw for people. We also had staff. The woman who was helping me make cheese was a trained chef, Culinary Institute of America trained chef. She had been a chef at local restaurants and restaurants elsewhere, and she and I would talk about how there was really no opportunity to showcase all the beautiful local food that was being grown in our area. And then myself and my husband, we are educators by background and just by nature, and we also like people, which is actually turns out to be really important if you're gonna go into tourism of any kind, agritourism. If you really, like, a lot of farmers do not like people, and if you don't like people, then really do not do agritourism. Okay, next slide. Okay, so another thing that kind of sparked this idea of getting into farm to table as specifically as a type of agritourism was this amazing opportunity that we had to welcome Carlo Petrini, the founder of Slow Food International, on our farm back in 2007. We were friends with someone who was running the Slow Food Chicago chapter, and he was hosting Carlo Petrini on a book tour. Carlo Petrini specifically asked to visit farms while he was on his book tour in Illinois. and our friend brought him to our farm, and we hosted a farmer potluck so that he could meet the area farmers, and everybody made something. The woman that would become our chef, Elisa DeMarco, was there as well. And it was a magical experience. He spoke no English. He had a translator. He spoke Italian only. And he requested a single long table be set up because in Italy, that's how people gather to enjoy a beautiful meal. That concept of sitting at long tables, meeting people that you've never met before, that was all very inspired by the slow food movement and our interaction with Carlo Petrini. And at the end of his time with us, he said in Italian, if I believed in reincarnation, I would come back as a goat on Prairie Fruits Farm, which was the ultimate compliment that he really understood our love of our animals, our care for our land, and how that was translating into the products that we were producing from those ideals. Okay, next slide. So the dream team in the background, the woman holding the tongs, that is Elisa DeMarco. She is an amazing chef. She's actually now a realtor, but she is incredibly talented. Really understood how to work with foods in season. Really understood how to showcase vegetables in a way that is rarely shown. Really focused on highlighting our cheeses and creating meals around our cheeses. She and I said, let's build a kitchen. We wrote a grant proposal to the Frontera Farmer Foundation and got a $12,000 grant, which covered about a third of the cost of building the kitchen back in 2008. And we raised additional funds to do that in the form of loans. And then we put together a trial dinner for family and friends in the summer of 2008. Next slide. So the trial dinner, valuable experience. It was a really great opportunity to get brutally honest feedback from people that we knew and trusted, and it helped define in a clear way how much food, the quality of the food, the importance of the experience overall, not just the food. So sitting outside, sitting at a table, on the ground. It was an incredibly hot and humid evening, and the air was unbelievably stagnant that day. And as the sun started to go down, the insects that were on the ground just were attacking people underneath the table. And it was a really awful experience for the guests, but it was also a blessing in disguise, because we realized that if we were going to set up tables outside, that we needed to elevate from the ground so that people were not having their feet and their legs literally at ground level. Also, just, it being a goat dairy, there are going to be flies, there are going to be odors, and having a way to acknowledge those kinds of things up front. The value of trained servers. So my husband and I did the serving for the friends and family dinner. And I had a little bit of waitress experience. My husband had zero food service experience. And at the end of the dinner, Elisa said to us, "You guys will never serve again." And what she meant by that was she needed trained staff to be part of this team, so that if we're charging a lot of money for these meals, it really has to be a stellar experience from the minute they set foot on the farm to the minute they leave. So, trial dinner, super important. Next slide. Okay. So we really had to kind of have some metrics uh, of how to price our events so that we were taking into consideration our staff, our salaries, our labor budget, basically having a trained chef and her back of the house team, her sous chef. We needed additional prep cook or two. We needed dishwashers. Then front of the house, we needed servers that really knew what they were doing. We needed to account for how much time it took to set up our tables, because every time we had an event, everything had to be set up from scratch. We did not have a permanent location for tables and chairs. We were sourcing at any given meal at least 80 to 90% of our ingredients from local farms. And that is and was a significant portion of the budget. We had to service our loans. The overhead would be things like utilities and just whatever additional fixed costs we would have. And then we were shooting for a 10 to 15% profit margin. So that's how we would determine what we would charge. But we also were just at the time kind of thinking about, well, what would people be willing to pay? So it was kind of a balance of using economic metrics with what people are willing to pay. Next slide. So our initial price, our very first year, the year that we actually opened our doors, 2008, we charged $65 a person for a 5-course prefix dinner. But we quickly realized that that was way undervaluing what people were getting. And we really needed to get at least a 10% margin, but knowing that 15 to 20% would be a lot better. We raised the following year in 2009, we raised the price to $85. And then we had a couple of really where we invited some really high-end guest chefs from Chicago, really well-known chefs, and we charged $125 per person for those dinners. But our in-house dinners remained at $85 for a good 2 or 3 years. We also came to realize that these dinners were hyper seasonal. So we didn't really start them until late May, usually the end of May, and they went until usually mid to late October because the focus was on outdoor dining. We didn't really have an indoor dining space. We really, the staff that were part of the kitchen team wore other hats because we couldn't afford to have a permanent full-time kitchen staff. So they often worked either in the creamery or on the dairy side or on the garden side or the orchard side. And then eventually we started having them do like jams and preserves and pickles and other things that we could sell in our farm store, so that we could keep them more fully employed in the kitchen setting. We also had a lot of discussions about, does the economics make sense to have a kitchen staff, or should we just farm out the food part of the event to guest chefs? Next slide. So how they evolved. In our first year, we held 5 dinners. So basically, we really didn't get the ball rolling until August of 2008. And so we had 5 dinners into the fall. Thereafter, we would do every 2 weeks, 10 to 14 per season, maximum 60 guests, because that's how many we could fit at 2 long tables. We eventually put up a pergola so that people could have some shade. But if it rained, we really were in a bind because we had very little space, indoor space, that we could move our tables into. Eventually, when we built out our space that would become our farm store, we could move the dining tables into that space for inclement weather. And also when the weather got cooler in the fall, we could extend the dinner season into early winter, early December, basically, so that we could have more dinners and generate more revenue. We would always invite guest farmers. We always had a theme. And one of the themes that took shape was a theme that we called the 100-yard dinner. And that really pushed our limits to think about what we could grow to create a 5-course meal that would basically be 95 to 98% of the food coming from our farm within 100 yards of the dinner table. The overall experience was people arriving at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, getting a cocktail. This was after we got a liquor license. Initially, it was BYOB. They would, if they brought their own alcohol, we would just open their wine for them, and they would drink that throughout the course of the meal. We would always do a farm tour for anyone that wanted to. During the meal, we would have the guest farmer talk about their farm, the food that we were featuring from that guest farmer. The chef would talk about every course and what inspired him or her to do the particular dish that they were doing based on that particular theme. So it really was, it was way more than a sitting down at a 4-top or a 2-top restaurant kind of eating experience. It was very integrated with talking, educating, experiencing the farm, in addition to eating this beautiful meal. Next slide. Okay, so as the dinners took shape, we really started developing a following. We would release ticket sales in the spring, in March, and this turned out to be a fantastic way to generate revenue at a time when cash flow for the dairy was absolutely at rock bottom. March is kidding season. There was no revenue coming in from cheese sales, no revenue coming in from anything dairy related at all. The only thing that was happening was massive expense on the part of labor and milk replacer and supplies to get us through kidding season and the beginning of cheese making season. So selling dinner tickets in March was a fantastic way to bridge our revenue until the first farmers markets opened up. And the tickets would sell out in minutes. It was really, really gratifying to see the response. We realized that growing our own vegetables for a lot of the meals had cachet. We should have really penciled that one out a little bit better, because as the garden grew and as our commitment to actually hiring a permanent gardener or seasonal gardener grew, the economics of having a farm garden to be the source for the farm kitchen didn't always pencil out economically, and in the end we realized it was more profitable to just source the produce from our neighbor farms that were growing, whose focus was growing vegetables and other produce, except for our 100-yard dinner. That was really still something that everyone looked forward to, and it was a challenge that we enjoyed taking on. Also, we raised the ticket price in 2014 to $125 a person. It did slow ticket sales a little bit, but at the end of the day, people were willing to pay because they knew they were getting this incredible experience, and they also knew that the food was going to be outstanding. Our chef, Elisa, she basically helped start this program in 2008, and then she decided that she wanted a change of lifestyle in 2015, and that was her last season with us on the farm. Next slide. Okay, just a little bit about this 100-yard dinner, because it was an incredible amount of work, but it was really a great story. It was really fun. We raised it. It was more than 85%. It was more like 90 to 95%. We would always have some kind of animal protein, usually some kind of poultry, but we had some great stories of trying to raise guinea fowl. We raised hogs one year. We raised ducks one year, which never again. We even, after a while, as I got more and more comfortable with the idea of raising goats for meat on our farm, we also served goat for the 100-yard dinner. All of the garden vegetables, fruits, herbs, we did a lot of creative things with the goat milk, beyond cheese, yogurt, all kinds of ways of including the milk into a dinner. And we even grew wheat one year so that we could actually have wheat-based products in the 100-yard dinner. It was a very cool project, incredibly labor-intensive, probably was not economically viable, but for Wes and me, it was actually a lot of fun. Next slide. We also, as we were thinking about additional revenue sources for the kitchen, we started doing benefits for nonprofit organizations. Chef Rick Bayless from Frontera Grill, who is really a very philanthropic guy. He and his wife Deanne came for a dinner that we did to raise funds for the Eastern Illinois Food Bank. We did several other types of benefit dinners, and we also did private dinners for various groups, business groups, university groups, and that was a great way to supplement the income from the Dinners on the Farm series. Next slide. Okay, so once Elisa left our farm, and we were looking to continue the farm dinners, we started partnering with guest chefs. We started doing brunch series with guest chefs. We would do private events also with guest chefs. We tried doing family-friendly happy hour on Friday afternoons, Friday evenings. We did cheese tastings and classes. We tried a dinner and a movie. All of this with an attempt to keep the kitchen active, but not have a permanent kitchen staff. Next slide. Just some pictures from the farm, guests enjoying at the evening. We always had the most spectacular sunsets. We always would try to do a cheese course featuring 2 or 3 of our cheeses. A lot of the farm dinner experience for the guests was hearing the stories, and the stories behind the dishes, the stories from the guest farmers, and stories from us about the overall seasonality of the products that they were eating, and why they were chosen, and why they made the dish so spectacular. Next slide. So one of the years that we farmed out the farm dinners was to a chef group in Chicago. They're called the Sunday Dinner Club. We had been selling cheese to them for a number of years when they were working in restaurants, and then when they started their own business in Chicago. called Honey Butter Fried Chicken. And they put together a series of dinners, some more casual than others. And that was a really, really great collaboration. Next slide. After a while, the elevated wooden platform that we had built and the pergola situation were really starting to fall apart. They just were weathering from the elements. And so we did a fundraiser to build an outdoor pavilion. And that pavilion is still standing. It's definitely a space that the new owners are using to great effect. It's a timber frame structure with a beautiful metal roof, and a couple of our staff from the dairy end of things actually helped erect the structure, which the builders had never worked with women on a crew, and our women really showed them that they are just as good, if not better, than the guys on the crew. Next slide. So the diversification of farm to table food, we started a fun spring program called Babies in Brunch. That was also an opportunity to get people to come out to the farm in the spring to see the baby goats in a semi-controlled fashion, to serve them a delicious local food breakfast. Initially, we were cooking to order, which was insane because we had lines out the door. There were no reservations. People just streaming in. It was really barely controlled chaos. And while everyone had a great experience, we really did not make much money on that style of enterprise. Eventually, we moved to more grab and go kind of food, simpler food, lower food cost, and that helped with the profitability. And then when COVID hit, which was truly a nightmare. However, we were able to do ticketed Babies in Brunch and space it so that we met the number of people that were allowed to be in any one space over time, and that actually turned out to be the most profitable way to run the Babies in Brunch. And to this day, that is how Babies in Brunch is run, even with the new owners. It also offered us an opportunity to bring people onto the farm to sell cheese before the farmers market season and to introduce them to new products. So when we launched our gelato in 2011, the Babies in Brunch was the debut of our goat milk gelato. We really should have run cost estimates for the Babies in Brunch. We, like so many things that we did on our farm, somebody suggested that we do something, or it sounded like a good idea, and we're like, yeah, let's do that, without really looking at what the true cost of doing it was until after the fact. That was a common theme for us. And sometimes it was wild. It was great. People loved it, but it was not really making money for us. And sometimes it was making money for us. Next slide. With new people coming into the kitchen and the food space, we started to do these other things. We would do a really lower priced, what we called Third Friday pop-ups. We brought in musicians. It was just like a really simple meal that was much more affordable for families. We also sold our cheese and gelato. And those were pretty popular, and they were profitable. And the issue was more the fact that when you don't have a ticketed event, you don't know how many people are going to show up. And so sometimes it was very profitable and sometimes not as much. And that's always a risk when you're doing an event without tickets. You just have no control of it, over how many people are going to show up. Next slide. We continued to expand the kind of agritourism offers as we got more experience under our belt. We did a lot of educational tours for school groups, high school groups, college classes. We would host the vet school to come out with their first years and have hands-on experience with our goats. We would do goat yoga in the spring with a woman who runs a flower farm who's also a yoga instructor. We started doing walks with the goats. We started doing an event called Dote on the Does, which was people having the ability to come out while the goats were pregnant in February and brush them and groom them and just kind of pamper them before kidding season started. We even did a happy hour with the goats in the pasture, and that was interesting because the goats kept pulling stuff off the bar while we were out in the pasture. We tried lots of different things, and we continue to have guest chefs come out, and we also offered a lot of cheese tastings, cheese pairings. Those were particularly popular in the fall, and teaching people how to put together a cheese platter for the holidays. I taught cheese making classes in the creamery. That was an all-day event of basically very hands-on in a commercial creamery setting, people learning the basics of cheese making, and then eventually getting to try the cheese that they made. So we did a lot of different things. Wes and I won a tourism award back when Judy Bartopinka was still the what was she, Secretary of State? I can't remember. Anyway, she's now passed away, but that was a really cool experience to be awarded a state tourism award. Next slide. So COVID really kind of forced us to get creative because we had very little, we couldn't do any farm dinners. We had very little opportunity to bring in revenue as it related to agritourism. And that is the year that we started doing an event called Goaty Halloween. It was a ticketed event. We dressed the goats in Halloween costumes, and small groups of people with their tickets could come out in costume, interact with the goats, do picture taking, and get some snacks while they were there. We also did Goats in Drag. That was part of Pride weekend in Champaign, Urbana. And the weekend after Thanksgiving, and then 2 or 3 weekends leading up to Christmas and early December, we would dress the goats in holiday attire, and people could come and take their holiday pictures with the goats. And then the goat hikes. These were hikes with our Young of the Year. It started with a volunteer coming to us and saying, I want to do this, I will run it. And she has been running it for the past 4 or 5 years very successfully. It's usually up to 15 people going on a 40-minute hike around the property. The goats basically follow along because they're so used to being with people, and it's just an incredible experience for people that have never had that kind of intimacy with goats before. So we've hosted wreath making workshops, cheese pairing workshops. I mean, there's so many different things that that we would be trying to do to generate additional revenue that utilized the goats in a way that was respectful of them, but also just a lot of fun. Next slide. The tours were really always extremely important for us, especially as educators. And it was really, really meaningful just to have, especially kids come out that really had very little opportunity to interact with animals in a working farm setting. We hosted day camps. We started, we got on the FFA circuit. So the Future Farmers of America have their national conference in Indianapolis every year in the fall. And the buses that are on their way to Indianapolis are looking for farms to tour. And we got added to that circuit. And that was an incredible opportunity to showcase a pasture-based goat dairy to a lot of kids that really were coming from more conventional agriculture backgrounds. Next slide. So the orchard, we started out as a fruit orchard. That was the first thing that we planted after we had tried to rehabilitate our very worn out ground from decades of corn and soybeans. We utilized the orchard as part of our agritourism experiences. Initially, after about 3 or 4 years, we had our tree fruits coming in. We had berries, and we started doing U-pick. We also started bringing this fruit to the farmers market, but a lot of it was, because it was organic, it was not always beautiful in the way that your general consumer expects fruit to be. So we started doing value-added products, jams, preserves, pickles, mostardas, and then once we started doing gelato, we would often puree our fruits and add them into the gelato, especially peaches and berries, cherries. And then in the fall, with our apples, we bought a cider press, and we would do cider days where people could come out and press their own cider, enjoy like a cider gelato float. So the fruit and the orchard were very integrated into the agritourism experiences on our farm initially, and up until the orchard really started to age out, which was around the time that COVID hit. Next slide. Yeah, so just a few little vignettes of how we did the U-pick, and then also like bringing the fruit to market, berry picking, peaches, beautiful. When we had a good peach crop, those peaches were like nothing anybody had ever experienced. And also a lot of people, because there's almost no places that are organic for tree fruits in the Midwest, and especially in central Illinois, families really appreciated coming out and picking their own fruit. Next slide. So as we evolved, as we thought back on what worked, what didn't work, we realized that most of the evolution of our agritourism program was organic, in the sense that we never really had a grand plan for it. It just kind of happened. And all of our motivations for getting people to come out to the farm were always to get more people to buy cheese. That was always the underlying motive for bringing people onto the farm, as well as educating them and like appreciating that goats are just naturally charismatic, but also giving people the experience of having an intimate experience with the goats that was also safe, not just for the people, but for the goats too. And really thinking about food as a way to connect people to how their food is grown and why farmers make the decisions that they make to grow food in a certain way, and how that translates into deliciousness. This idea of stealth education that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, uh, we were always wanting people to come away learning something that they did not know before they showed up on our farm. And we weren't hammering them over the head with it. We were letting them experience these things on a working farm, and then coming to realize, oh, wow, well, okay, yeah, that's why this costs so much, because it's clearly a shitload of work to do what you do. And I'm never going to come. We had a number of people say after they visited the farm or toured it, the people that took my cheese making class, they're like, oh, yeah, wow. Never going to complain again about the cost of your cheese, because we can see how much work goes into it. For myself and my husband, the agritourism became it was a double-edged sword, in the sense that we do love people, but the constancy of every single week, every single weekend, people we lived on our farm. Our house was at the beginning of the driveway, and just people driving past our house all the time. Eventually, that wore on us. Even as we started giving more responsibility to our staff, so that we didn't have to physically be involved, at the end of the day, everything did come down to our involvement and our making sure that people who were coming onto the farm had stellar experiences, and that the goats were not being mistreated in any way by the guests. And we also really came to appreciate the doing of financial analyses before any event was undertaken, to make sure that it penciled out. Next slide. So, what are some of the things that you should really be considering if you are going to do agritourism? Insurance. You've got to have proper liability coverage. And if you're asking people to do things on your farm that might result in them getting injured, so like we have a volunteer kitting program where people sign up to help feed baby goats. Every volunteer that participates in that program has to sign a waiver to free you, the farmer, from any lawsuit should they get injured. Those are just kind of standard things that you really need to have in place. Minimum $2 million liability coverage. And the other things that you really need to think about are the biosecurity. You have no idea where people have been, if they've been on other farms, that they could be transporting disease into your farm. You want to make sure that guests understand how to interact with the animals. We frequently had to tell parents to control their kids in a polite way, so that they weren't, either pulling on a collar or pulling on ears. We had a lot of signage instructing people to not put their hands in the goats' mouths, and not feed them things other than what we may have on offer to them. So we also emphasize that this is not a petting zoo. You don't buy a little handful of grain or whatever to feed them. There wasn't really a lot of opportunity for guests to feed the animals, and we made sure of that. Whether to get a liquor license or not, this was initially something that we didn't feel we needed to get. But as the food component grew as part of our farm to table experience, it did make sense for us to go through the cost and the permitting process to get a liquor license. And we eventually were able to dissuade people from bringing their own wine. But selling alcohol is really a good way to help with the bottom line. How to get the word out to people? Obviously, in this day and age, social media is key. Uh, whether you want to do paid advertising, it's not really clear to me what that paid advertising really works. Word of mouth, social media, people having great experiences and telling other people, that seemed to be the best way to get the word out in our case. And then setting the pricing of events. It's this balance of making sure your costs are covered, but also understanding what the market will bear. And if you are charging what seems like a high price for something, having your staff understand how to explain to guests why things cost the way they do, and not be afraid to defend the price of that particular experience. People wanted free parking, and we did that for a number of years. But then when Babies and Brunch was really kind of a runaway train and very chaotic, we started charging, like $5 a car for parking, and there was some pushback. So you kind of have to understand what you need to do to create an experience that is meaningful for your guests. And you also want to make sure that you are controlling the chaos. And you also need to make sure that you are charging what you need to charge so that it not only is a break even, but that it's profitable. And then the other thing that really was an issue for us frequently was the fact that we were a working farm, and we were open during hours when day-to-day operations were very much active, and to make sure that people understood that they had to, if our dairy was moving hay or using farm equipment, that people had to be mindful that those sounds and inconveniences might be going on, because the work of the farm goes on no matter whether you have guests on the farm or not. And also just the presence of insect pests like flies on a dairy, it's just inevitable. And so how do you manage that so that it's not a really, really unpleasant experience for people, but that they also can appreciate that there are going to be insects on a working dairy farm. Next slide. So depending on what you want to do, it's really critical to have the right infrastructure. Not a lot of people put a licensed kitchen on their farm because it's expensive. It's expensive to build, it's expensive to maintain, and you're inspected by, in our case, we're outside the city limits, so we're inspected by the county, public health. We really had to define our identity. Who were we? Were we a farm first and foremost with food, or a restaurant on a farm? Those are very different goals. And the current owners of the farm really are moving more toward a restaurant on a farm, as opposed to what we did, which were event-driven kinds of food experiences. We never really got into the life cycle events like weddings, anniversaries, birthdays, etc. But I know that those can be incredibly lucrative kind of events to host on a farm, because a lot of people are looking for a farm venue. But those kind of things create a whole other set of challenges that we were not willing to take on. And getting people to follow your rules. How do you enforce your rules? How do you set your rules, first of all? How do you train your staff to enforce the rules in a way that isn't going to offend people, but so that they really understand the importance of following the rules? And then the revenue streams. You really, really need to understand how much you're making and whether or not it's worth it to continue something. We tried a lot of different things. We were very much like, throw it against the wall, and if it sticks, we'll do it, and then evaluate it after the fact. And I don't recommend doing that. I really think it's really good to run projections, think about all of the costs, internal, external, and then make a decision as to whether this is something that you want to undertake. Next slide. Okay, so I was looking for some really good online resources for you all that are basically financial templates. And this list is some of the things that I found online. There are specific agritourism business plan models that you can refer to in each of these links. The UpMetrics one, it's a free template. All of these are free templates. And I thought that they were particularly relevant because agritourism is a distinct kind of business enterprise. And I thought that these folks did a really good job of putting together templates that you can plug in your own numbers with. Last slide, please. Okay, a little bit how you can reach me. I'm available for consultation if this is something that you want to pursue. If you have any questions, you can email me. You can follow me on. I'm a writer. I do write almost weekly on Substack. So feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions, but we certainly have time now to take your questions.
Hello. That was awesome. I saw that Happy Hooves Farm said that the wheels are turning, and they definitely are for me too.
Okay.
We've got a few questions. The first one was, could you tell us a little bit more about the fundraiser that you did for the new pavilion?
Yes. So this was at the, when, oh gosh, what is that program called? It's not GoFundMe.
Kickstarter?
Yeah, Kickstarter. When that whole scenario was like, farmers were really starting to tap into Kickstarter to raise money for things that they wanted to get done on farms. We thought long and hard about doing a Kickstarter campaign, and we basically ran the fundraiser on our own website and bypassed, because the thing about Kickstarter was if you didn't meet your goal, you didn't get any of the money in most cases. So it was a homemade fundraiser campaign. And we just, used our email list from the website and my newsletter to reach out to our customer base to raise funds to build the pavilion.
Did you give people premiums and stuff like on
Yes,
Kickstarter?
yes, yeah. We had that whole structure of tiered donation levels based, and then they would get something at a various level of promotion, whether it was like T-shirts or free cheese or free gelato, or for the really high-end donors, they got to have like a dinner of up to 8 people prepared by our chef. It was, yeah, it definitely was tiered, and there were rewards, if you will.
Oh, I like that. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, it was very successful.
Cool. So another question is, what did you charge for your cheese?
Uh, $30 a pound. Yes. So our chev was packaged in a 6-ounce container for retail, and our charge for the cheese at the farmers market. For a long time, it was basically a dollar an ounce, so $6 a pound. $6 for a 6-ounce container. And then once we started doing more nitty gritty cost analysis of our cheeses, we raised the price. So when we sold to the new owners, our price for the 6-ounce container of Chev was $8.50, and I'm pretty sure they raised it to $10 or $9.95, and they are selling it at that. It depended on the type of cheese. So the fresh cheese that had a higher profit margin, because it was a higher yielding cheese, we could sell at a lower per pound price. The hard cheeses, like our raw goat's milk tone style cheese, we were selling initially for, I think, $25 a pound, but when we sold the business last year, we were selling it for closer to $35 to $40 a pound. But that's like, the and we were also raising our prices in line with what other artisan and farmstead cheese makers were selling their cheeses for in different parts of the country.
All right. And then Happy Little Hooves Farm is wondering how it went with the goats in drag during Pride Week.
It was fantastic. We had great turnout. People absolutely loved it. They just thought it was a hoot. We had a number of we had like kind of local drag celebrities come out and take their pictures with guests, with the goats dressed up. So the goats were dressed up. The the um, the drag kings and queens were here, and then people were taking pictures with both the goats and the people. And we had food, and we had tours. It was a great experience.
So it was mostly like a photo op with tours and food, like snack foods.
Yes. Yes.
All right. I was wondering so this is a question for me.
Okay.
When you were talking about breakfast on the farm, brunch and breakfast, the thing that always pops into my head now when I think of on farm events was that I was at an ADGA conference in Atlanta in like 2017 or 18. And there was somebody there from the CDC who talked about a huge listeria outbreak on a goat dairy that opened their doors for farm visits during kidding season.
Oh, wow.
And it was not related to food at all. It was just related to people getting like touching poop.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then
Oral contact. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm always nervous about the idea of like, I tell people, if you want to bring a picnic lunch to our farm, you can have it before you meet the goats because I don't want them to, contaminate their food with anything. I mean, because stuff like salmonella and E. coli can be in poop of a healthy animal,
Absolutely.
So I was wondering, how did you walk that line with the food and the goats on the same farm?
Yeah, so we were very, very cognizant of food safety and just the potential for two-way, like if people were letting their kids put their dirty hands in goats' mouths, what could they potentially make the goats sick? And also, if they were touching the goats, touching the railing, that the kids put their little poopy feet all over the fences, and then if kids are touching the fences or adults are touching the fences, you have a fecal oral contact nightmare. So we had hand washing stations set up everywhere. We had our either our volunteers or our staff instructing people to wash their hands after they had petted the goats before they would come in to eat. Some people did eat before, but we didn't really police that aspect of it. We really were policing the hand washing aspect, and we had sanitizer set up everywhere. So combination of using hand sanitizer, physical soap and water hand washing stations. We set them up either ourselves. We also, at one point, we rented a hand washing station. You can rent those porta potties. They also rent hand washing stations. So instructing guests to wash their hands was an integral part of these food and goat interaction kind of events.
Okay. And then another question we have is, how did you manage insects on the dairy?
So the dairy was not organic. Our very first year, we had hoped to be certified organic. But we were animal welfare approved from 2010 onward. And when you say insects, do you mean like flies, or what specific insects are you talking about?
I was thinking flies, and then I was mostly thinking flies.
So flies were a constant battle for us. And we really tried to approach fly infestation with the whole idea of hygiene, and making sure that the bedding was rebedded frequently, that the barns were cleaned out on a regular basis, that anywhere where organic debris might be accumulating, so where the goats were coming into the parlor in the holding pen, we would have to have that cleaned out frequently. We also kept all of the weeds weed whacked around the buildings, because flies like to lay their eggs in tall vegetation. So keeping all of that vegetation adjacent to the barns and the parlor and etc. was all very frequently weed whacked and mowed to almost to stubble. We also used fly predators. I don't know if you're familiar with those. It's a parasitic wasp that you purchase every week. Like, you get a certain amount of larvae that you sprinkle on the bedding, and when they hatch, they seek out the fly larvae in the bedding and predate the larvae so that they never hatch. So we tried that. We would do some they work really great. We did, if the infestation was really bad, we had a professional pest control service, because we were obligated to have that for food safety for the creamery. And if we had an event that was really important, or the fly situation was just out of control, we would have them do an exterior spray around the buildings occasionally. We tried to avoid that because that was just, kind of a short-lived knockdown kind of thing. We really tried to keep the environment inhospitable to flies laying their eggs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even with that, it's so hard. It's so hard. And people don't want to be sitting outside eating food and having literally like a an outbreak of flies descending on their food. It's a very unpleasant experience. So it was a challenge for us.
Yeah, we had a kids camp on our farm for 3 years, and having food with children is also a huge fly attractant because they're dropping food, and of course that's attracting more flies too. So
Right, right.
I'm
Yeah,
sure you,
yeah.
I'm sure.
I mean, the other thing we learned too is if you have the ability to locate where your food is being served far away from your barns, the further away, the better. Because flies. Oh, the other thing that we were using were these fly traps that it's a really stinky attractant in like a jar with a funnel thing, and the flies fly into it and they never come back out. Those were amazing. I think the same company that we got our fly predators from had those fly traps, and they were very effective.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. I think that's it. It doesn't look like we have any more questions. It was wonderful having you here today. I know you gave people so many ideas. I I know you did a lot, but you mentioned a lot of things that I didn't even know about. So,
Oh, okay, good, good. Yeah. I mean, we learned a lot from these experiences, and so my hope is that people are willing to try new things and have fun with it. Um, but also really go into it with stronger financial eyes wide open. That is it's important. You need to make money at these things.
yeah, exactly. And I think it when you just think about it, you don't think of all the little things that are going to add up, you know? Um, it sounds like, oh yeah, that should be great. We should have plenty of profit there. And then, but that's because you don't think of all the little things, that you talk
Yes.
about.
Yes. Yes.
So,
Lavender fabuloso. Okay, that's interesting. I'll mention that to the new owners of Prairie Fruits.
all right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It was great having you all here today. And this was the last of the events this week. We'll send you an email with links to all the replays in case you missed anything or if you want to watch it a second time. And also for those of you in Goats 365 and those of you in the Goat or in the Homestead Business course, all these videos are going to permanently be housed in there as well. So you'll be able to access them in there. Thank you again, Leslie.
My pleasure. It's a lot of fun.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.